Welcome to our today's lesson where we are going to discuss biology from 1, topic 5, where we have food chains and food webs. You are with me, George Chapusa, your biology teacher. Stay there. So, food chains and food webs. Of course, there are so many animals in an environment which they interact into so many activities. And these animals, they also happen to feed on the other animals. Others, they happen to feed on grasses. And others, they happen to feed on both. So, this is where we discuss how animals interact into one another in terms of dependence. So, in an environment, plants make their own food and the animals feed on other organisms. Then such relationship is called feeding interrelationship. So, plants in an environment are regarded as food producers. So, plant as food producers. Plants make their own food, which they store as a starch. You may recall this from your primary section, where you were learning that plants, through the process which we call photosynthesis, it is able to make its own food. So plants also make up minerals and nutrients like nitrates from the soil, and they make plant proteins. Normally, these plants, they happen to make these mineral nutrients like nitrates from the soil, and they then make plant proteins. So these plants are also regarded as primary producers. Because they are the starters, and then they are the ones to produce, and they are regarded as primary producers. So the starch and the plant protein made in the plant is used to make new cells and tissues for the plant growth. And to add on that, there are structures like leaves, seeds, fruits are made using food made by the plant. Right, so these nutrients can also be taken up by animals which eat the plant as food. Remember, we're discussing about a plant as the primary producer. It happens to make structures like leaves, seed, and fruits which are made from the food made by this plant through the process we call it photosynthesis. And then these nutrients that also happen to be included in these structures could also be taken up by animals which eat the plant as food. So this creates a food relationship between the plant and the animals that eat the plant. In feeding interrelationships, it is not only nutrients that are passed on from one organism to another, but also we have energy. Energy contained in the food in form of chemical energies also is being taken by these animals. And then the main sources of energy in an ecosystem is the sun. Remember, we have just said that plants are able to make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. And this process, for it to happen, there must be a source of energy. And this source of energy could be the sun energy. So this in an ecosystem becomes the main source. Why? Because without this source, plants could be in a position to make their own food, and then other animals could also fail to feed on these plants because there could be no plants growing because these plants would be in a position to make their own food. So that's why this sun is regarded as the main source of energy in an ecosystem. So the sun produces solar energy, and light energy from the sun is trapped by green plants and used during the process of photosynthesis to form carbohydrates. Of course, these carbohydrates, it is the food for these plants. If the plants are to make their own food, they make this food in form of these carbohydrates. So the light energy is thus converted to chemical energy and stored in the plant. this energy from the sun is being converted to chemical energy for the plant to use, and it happens also this plant to store this energy. Yeah. So this explains why plants are termed as primary producers. Why they never they make their own food and then they have life existing without depending on other organisms. Now, animals as food consumers. Why do you think could we regard animals as food consumers? Animals are organisms that are unable to make their own food. As a result, they consume the food which is already made by the plants. So these are regarded as food consumers. So some organisms feed directly on the plants to obtain their energy, which means those which feed on the plants and then they get direct energy from them. And these organisms are known as herbivores. These organisms are known as herbivores. Of course, herbivores are an example of animals which feed normally on the plants only. So these might include cows, goats, sheep, zebras, and among others. These are just few examples to mention, but there are so many animals which feed only on plants. So these are known as herbivores, and they are animals which feed directly on the plants for them to obtain energy. So animals obtain this energy indirectly. We are trying to look at animals as consumers. You find that other animals as consumers, they obtain energy indirectly by feeding on the herbivores. These organisms are known as carnivores. We have a group of other animals which don't feed on the plants directly. They feed on the animals which eat the plants. As a result, they also get the same energy from the plants indirectly. So these animals are regarded as carnivores or carnivores. So they include lions, leopards, hyenas, among others. There are so many examples of this type of animals, just to mention very few from them. Then, collectively, both herbivores and carnivores are called consumers because they cannot manufacture their own food. All of them, without plants, they are useless. They may never survive. They all depend on plants for them to survive. Yeah, when an organism dies, some of the chemical energy in the organism is released into the surrounding when it decays. This is always there. Different organisms, when they die, some of the chemical energy in them is released into the environment or into the surroundings when it decays. So some energy in animals is also lost as heat energy in their breath, urine, feces, and sweat. Now, that was a demonstration of animals as consumers. Now, let us identify animals according to their mode of feeding. Of course, you should remember that we are on this topic, we are on this lesson to discuss the food chain and the food web. We may not continue discussing the food chain and the food web if you have not identified how other animals feed. So now let us look onto the herbivorous and their mode of feeding. So herbivorous mode of feeding. So in the herbivorous mode of feeding, animals feed on plant material only. So like we have started sharing already, herbivorous animals are animals which only feed on plants. Whatever nature of the plant, it depends on the other kind of the animal again is feeding. So these animals are called herbivorous or herbivores. So the plant material may be grass or leaves and twigs. Yeah, so animals that feed on grass only are called grazers. I'm starting again. Animals that feed on grass only are called grazers, meaning others can feed on other things like twigs, and the rest. So those grazers, we have examples like cows and zebras. So there we have an example of a zebra, and this being a zebra, it's an example of a grazer. On top of that, we also have other animals that feed on both grass, leaves, and twigs. They feed on both grass, leaves, and twigs. So this nature of animals, they are called browsers. They are browsers, and examples might include goats and giraffes. They may feed on the grass, and then they might also feed on the leaves, and then continue by feeding again on the twigs. So this is a diagram of a goat, and it is also demonstrating how they browse. Yeah. So now let us look at the carnivorous mode of feeding. The carnivorous mode of feeding. We also need to understand how carnivores feed on their prey. So in carnivorous mode of feeding, animals feed on the flesh of other animals. Like we have already shared, that carnivorous animals are the group of animals which feed only on other animals. Such animals are called carnivorous, like we have already said. And again, we might have some few examples here, like the hawks, eagles, lions, leopards, the jaguars, among others. These are examples of the animals which feed on other animals. Some carnivores, like the leopards, kill the prey and feed on the flesh. There are other animals, they kill themselves, they prey, and then feed on that flesh. This means another type of carnivorous animals, they never kill their own prey. So we might say some scavenge and feed on the flesh left behind by other carnivores. Some scavenge and feed on the flesh left behind by other carnivores. Such kind of animals are called scavengers. Scavengers are the kind of animals, of course, if they happen to have a chance, they can also kill. But normally in an environment, they depend much on the animals or the prey left by other animals or other carnivores. So those are called scavengers. Of course, here I have examples of scavengers. So examples of scavengers might include the vultures and the hyenas. The vultures and the hyenas. Of course, this is a leopard. This is a leopard, and this is coming here as an example of a carnivore. An example of a carnivore. Now, finally, not final as such, but we talk about these groups of animals. We might talk about omnivorous mode of feeding. Another group of animals which feed on both plants and animals. It feeds on both plants and animals. Now, let us discuss their mode of feeding. Now, omnivorous is a mode of feeding in which animals feed on mixed diet of animals, fresh and vegetable matters. Omnivorous is a mode of feeding in which animals feed on a mixed diet of animals, animal fresh and vegetable matters. Like what I already said, they feed on both. They feed on animals and then vegetable matters. So these the mix in any kind of the way how they feed it, but as far as they feed on the flesh of other animals, and then they also feed on the vegetation. We might say these kind of organisms are called omnivores, and examples of omnivores might include human beings. You are there as a human being, you are an example, a very good example of omnivores. So carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores ingest complex food materials. To ingest is like to take in. So they ingest complex food materials, and this food material may be in solid form or in a liquid form. Despite that, the solid food materials need to be broken down into smaller pieces. So this is referred to as the physical breakdown of food. Physical breakdown of food or physical digestion. So it increases the surface area of the food material in preparation for the digestion by enzymes. Remember, we're discussing about how these organisms have their feeding mode. So now we're talking it in general that these carnivores, herbivores, and the omnivores, they happen to ingest complex food materials. As they ingest these complex food materials, the material may be in solid form or in a liquid form. But as they ingest this kind of food, some of the food could be in solid materials whereby they will need to be broken down into smaller pieces. Such kind of an activity is what is referred to as physical breakdown of food. So this breaking down of food increases the surface area of the food materials in preparation for digestion by the enzymes. So these could be some of the explanation that I might put when I am discussing with you feeding mode with the carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores. Remember, this topic is about food chain and food web. Now, we have known how these carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores with their feeding mode or their feeding habits. Now we can discuss the food chain. Yeah, so let us continue our discussions where we discuss the food chains. So the definition of this word food chain could be a food chain is a sequence used to describe a feeding relationship between producers and consumers. I'll come again. A food chain is a sequence used to describe a feeding relationship between producers and consumers, which means there are other organisms which are regarded as producers, while there are other organisms which are regarded as producers. So, for those which are being eaten by other organisms can be regarded as producers, and those who eat on those other organisms can be regarded as consumers. Now, for instance, plants are eaten by grasshoppers. In this case, we may say this relationship can be represented by inserting an arrow between the plant and the grasshopper as follows. This relationship can be represented by inserting an arrow between the plant and the grasshopper as follows. Now, the plants are on the start, and where we have the grasshoppers at the end. This arrow shows how this food has been transferred, meaning the plants can be regarded as the producers and the grasshopper are now the consumers, which means grasshopper, they consume plants. Yeah, so if you may see that the direction of the arrow indicates where food is being transferred to. As a result, which means if you are to continue making this food chain, you may find out that if there are other animals which can also consume or can eat grasshoppers, then the arrow should continue by pointing that animal which is able to eat the grasshoppers. So the plant transfers food to the grasshoppers, or the plant is eaten by grasshoppers. If the grasshopper is eaten by spider, another arrow is inserted between the grasshopper and the spiders. So this can also be shown again as follows. You see, plants, grasshoppers, and now we have spiders. This is an indication that spiders, they feed only grasshoppers, and the grasshoppers, they feed only plants. This can continue up to where you may wish to stop. As far as in that environment, those are the kind of animals which you feel like they feed on each other. So plants are being eaten by grasshoppers, and the spiders eat grasshoppers, according to what I can explain for you to understand the food chain. So this sequence is called the food chain. Alright, so we may continue to discuss again the food webs. Now, food webs are similar, are the same way with food chain, but in this case, we are now looking into an environment where more than one food chain are combined, and if they are combined, now they form a food web. considering in an environment where more than one food chain are combined. And when these food chains are combined, they form a food web. Now, a food web shows all the animals in an environment and which animal is eaten by which. For instance, grass can be eaten by grasshoppers and aphids at the same time. Grass can be eaten by grasshoppers. Not only grasshoppers eat grass, you may also look at aphids. They also happen to eat grass. So, plants are now producers. Now, grasshoppers and aphids are now regarded as consumers. But grasshoppers, they eat grass. At the same time, aphids also eat the grass, which means, in so doing, there is a food web whereby different animals are feeding the same type of food at the same time or in that environment. Now, aphids can be eaten by spiders. Alright. If aphids also can be eaten by spiders, we may also consider to say grasshoppers can also be eaten by spiders and the lizards. In so doing, which means this being the food web, which means those grasshoppers, even if they feed on the grass and we had aphids also feed on the grass, we may also see that spiders can eat aphids at the same time. The same spiders can also eat grasshoppers. All right. So this kind of eating whereby you see different kind of animals feeding on one species, and then you find that that species again being eaten with different kind of animals. That shows that that kind of relationship or that kind of feeding in an environment is regarded as the food web. Now, so considering from the above information, the following food chain can be obtained. You may have grass being fed by grasshoppers. Grasshoppers also can be eaten by spiders. Or you may say grass can be eaten by grasshoppers and the same grasshoppers can be eaten by lizard. Grass can be eaten by aphids and at the same time, the same aphids can be eaten by a spider. Of course, the food chain are made according to the type of the environment that you have. These are not the only animals which make the food chain. So many animals in an environment happens to make different kind of food chains. Now, combining these food chains is where we make a food web. Now, I may bring this so that you understand what is the food web. So, if the above food chains are combined, they form a food web, and it resembles the web of a spider. I think you have ever seen how a spider makes its web in different kind of homes or environment. So, plants are the producers. We may have different kind of consumers. Now, plants are being eaten by aphids and grasshoppers. So, these animals, like what I have already explained, they point to the animal which is getting the food. So, plants produce the food, and then aphids, they feed on the food being produced by the plant, and we may say at the same time, grasshoppers also happen to benefit on the plants. Now, so many animals can be regarded according to the environment, but in this case, we have aphids and grasshoppers. And the same aphids and grasshoppers also can be eaten by spiders. At the same time, lizard can also feed on the grasshoppers. So, this type of demonstration illustrates what a food web is. Now, this has been the food chain and the food web that I wanted to share with you. But to continue on that, we may now talk about feeding structures in animals. Feeding structures in animals. Now, for animals to feed, they need feeding structures that enable them to obtain and eat their food. For animals to feed, they need feeding structures, and that enable them to obtain and eat their food. You may bear with me that so many animals, they happen to use different kind of feeding structures for those animals to obtain and eat their food. Animals have different types of feeding structures, and feeding structures for animals feeding on plants are different for them. Those animals are feeding on other animals. I come again. Feeding structures for animals feeding on plants are different from those of animals feeding on other animals. Yes, that is very much true, whereby we issue out the concern, whereby you see animals which eat plants might have different feeding structures with animals which feed on other animals or feed on both. Now, the feeding structures in animals are the teeth, beaks, and feet of birds. I'll come again. The feeding structures in animals are the teeth, beaks, and feet of birds. Yeah, so those are the greatest feeding structures that we might discuss in this lesson according to feeding structures in animals. So next time we meet, I'll take you from there, where we start with the teeth of mammals as the feeding structures of mammals. Until we meet in the other lesson, I've been Joe Chapusa. Thank you for now.